Mainebiz Sunday is brought to you by Bangor Savings Bank, where you can enjoy free ATMs worldwide. You're watching Mainebiz Sunday, Maine's business news source.
Welcome back. There's been a lot of rail-related news recently. A new feasibility study commissioned by the Maine Department of Transportation pegs the price tag for extending passenger rail service from Portland to Auburn at $230 million and close to $900 million to extend it to Montreal. And the state is now the owner of 233 miles of rail lines in northern Maine, which it purchased in January after the Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway abandoned the lines, claiming they weren't profitable. With us today to discuss both these issues are Nate Moulton, Director of the Maine Department of Transportation's Rail Program, and Sue Moreau, a Policy Development Specialist at Maine DOT's Bureau of Planning. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Our first guest, Fletcher Kittredge, the CEO of GWI, and we were talking about broadband internet and infrastructure for that. And now I said, now this segment we're going to talk about an older form of infrastructure, the rail lines, which are just as important and have many of the same issues in terms of Maine being a large state, sparsely populated, and how do we make it all pay for itself? Same thing as broadband, actually. So I'm going to start with the future of freight in general, and then also in particular the MM&A in specific. So Nate, I'm going to start with you. We did purchase that line, 233 miles in January, right? And so now you're in the process of finding an operator for that. One of the things I wanted to point out in point of context was that Pat Vaillancourt of the Fraser Paper in Madawaska area said, quote, "If we go without rail, we might as well close the mills." He added, "Thank God for the state of Maine and the taxpayers." Well, you don't hear that very often from big businesses. Thank God for the state of Maine. A lot of times they want the state of Maine to stay out of it. And this is one of those things where they said, get involved. So what's the status of that now? Where are we? And was it still a good idea?
Yeah, and I think that's the focus. The one thing we want to focus on this whole thing, it wasn't about saving the railroad. This is about keeping intact that transportation option for Maine businesses up in that region. Right. And so that's what this was all about. And you know, we did make the purchase. The voters passed a bond so that we could do that. We have been fortunate enough with the help of our delegation to secure $10.5 million to rehabilitate those lines as well and put them in a state of good repair. So that's very important. And back in late December, we put our request for proposals on the street to solicit new operators. We had five viable responses. About a month ago, we narrowed that to 3. And we allowed those 3 have spent the last 2 or 3 weeks up in the county, talking with the businesses, meeting with them, looking at the challenges as well as the potential upside of doing business up there. And we have the 3 coming in next week to do final detailed proposals and interviews with our panel, and probably by the first week of April we'll be making a recommendation. So
you're getting close
on selection. Yes.
What will be different for these new operators as opposed to when MM&A was operating it? Is it going to be profitable for them? Will we have to subsidize them?
Yeah. One thing as a policy, we've has always been a policy of the DOT, and will continue to be on this project. We do not subsidize freight operations on railroad. And so the quick answer is no to that question. Will we subsidize it? But the bigger piece is we're going to hold those ownership costs as well as taxes and things like that. So the previous owner had borrowed money to purchase this rail line, had payments to make. So you know, we're taking away that mortgage. So the bottom line becomes easier to cover because you don't have those costs, as well as, you know, going to work real hard with this railroad, you know, to market and develop new businesses, and hopefully again create a viable operation up here. And one thing this did, the rail line almost going away, it did motivate those businesses up there to know they need the rail, and hopefully we'll work harder to make use of that option. Right.
I can't get by without another quote here. This one's from Joe McGonigal, who was the vice president of MM&A, when he was asked about the problem of too little volume and too few customers who are too far apart. That's kind of the main dilemma. He said, quote, "To assume that railroads are going to be in Maine forever is probably the wrong assumption." What do you think about that?
Well, as they
Is
were
that too far apart and too sparse?
Yeah, I think in some areas that's true, and we've seen lines go away. I mean, and that's been the way of railroads across the country. But you've got to find those locations where it's important and create a critical mass. It is a volume business. It's a volume business, and that's what we've got to create is what piece of the systems can we maintain, and how do we create volumes on those remaining systems.
And the last part of that was that part of it was the change in the business model into the way business. They're not operating in that big volume anymore. They're becoming more kind of keeping inventories lower, smaller shipments, those kind of things. That's got to have an impact too.
It is. Just in time is tough for the railroads, but it's finding those markets where the railroads excel at moving heavy goods long distances, looking for those markets. Taking advantage of our other infrastructure with truck to rail and rail back to truck, the ports, things like that, and creating a win-win for everybody.
Okay, we're going to keep you around and talk some more about that.
Absolutely.
Sue, I want to get to you and talk about the future of rail. The feasibility study that you've been doing about the extension up to Auburn and then possibly to Bethel and possibly to Montreal.
Right.
So I guess that's the question. Is it feasible?
Well,
and when do we start?
We tried to start off with laying a foundation.
Yep.
There were a lot of assumptions out there as far as what ridership would be, a lot of anecdotal information, a few surveys that were done a few years back that we wanted to put some real data and find out exactly what the cost would be and what the ridership would be, and also really to speak with the public, the municipalities, the businesses along the way, the host railroads as well, and to find out what they thought about taking intercity rail from Portland to Auburn, to Bethel, and then on to Montreal. What were the challenges? Where were the barriers to that? And to start with this first piece. It was not a long study. We started back in September, and we're already wrapping it up. But along the way, we discovered initially we were looking at just Auburn, Amtrak service to Auburn.
Right.
But when we met with the communities beyond Auburn and into South Paris and Bethel, we found out that there was a lot of interest there. And we decided to look at the ridership as well into those communities. And noticed that certainly from Bethel, for intercity service, we were attracting a lot of ridership.
Okay, I can understand the interest part. When you ask them, are there going to be costs that those municipalities are going to be able to, willing and able to bear too? Will they have to be?
We didn't get into that, but if you use the Downeaster as a model, and that is the passenger rail service that we have in the state currently, the host communities that have stations do contribute as far as maintaining the facility. Just like
Brunswick just did.
Exactly right.
And that's not cheap. I mean, you have to invest.
But they also get the benefit of it,
right,
which is they attract a lot of development around those stations and are able to focus their communities around that as far as an asset.
So in terms of ridership, what do the numbers show then? What do you think they would be able to project going forward? Well,
we were looking at from Portland to Auburn annually about 30,000 is what we're looking at. That's three trips a day, 3 round trips a day. And that is for people to get on the train in Auburn and go all the way to Boston. They wouldn't have to switch over in Portland. From the Bethel area, we were up to about 66,000 annually. Again, people going directly from Bethel all the way to Boston and the reverse. To Montreal, we were tacking on about another 115,000 on top of that. The ridership that we have now from Portland to Boston is almost 500,000. So you can see where the difference is. So the cost per rider is more that we're seeing in that segment.
We're going to have to wrap there, but I'm going to keep you around and talk about that too, because it is that cost piece that is so we have to deal with. This has to be subsidized, otherwise it doesn't work. We're going to talk about that. My last question to you when we get to the afterthoughts is going to be, why not buses? Why doesn't that work? So we're going to talk. And maybe it does. Okay. So stick around. Thanks. You can catch more of this discussion about the future of rail service in Maine in our exclusive Afterthought segment seen only on the web. Just go to MainebizSunday.com. We'll be right back.
Mainebiz Sunday is made possible in part by funding provided by the Finance Authority of Maine.